Wolves aren't the only things haunting Scarlet's dreams. 12-year-old Scarlet listened to her mother list the goodies going into her basket. To tell the truth, she honestly hated the family secret, but that couldn't be helped. She grabbed her blood-red cloak as she headed out the door, putting the heavy goodie basket into the basket of her bicycle as she tied the cloak securely around her chin. She quickly got on the bike and started pedaling. She had quite a ways to go before she got to her grandmother's sweet shop. No, it wasn't the distance that was causing her to be paranoid. Not at all. In fact, this evening was special. So very special indeed. Of course, every time one of the Red girls turned 12, he always showed up. Always. It was tradition, and Scarlet had made up her mind. But sometimes tradition didn't work out. Scarlet shook her head and pedaled faster, before suddenly lurching to a stop as people crossed the path in front of her. She glared at them, wishing they'd hurry up. Didn't they understand tonight was special? Apparently they did. One of the pedestrians stopped and looked at her worried.
Good luck, girl. Maybe that old bike can move fast enough.
Scarlet held back a snort before pressing on, as she followed the long, winding path through town, and then the forest. Her mind wandered. She'd been having the same dream for weeks now. Always, a pack of wolves chased her, until she couldn't run anymore. Then they circled, watching, waiting for their leader to show up. When he did, right before he leapt, was when she woke up. Week after week, this kept happening. And maybe, just maybe, Scarlet could finally put an end to it. Slowly, she made the bike stop. This was as far as the bike would go, as was the long-held tradition. From this point on, she would go on foot. She grabbed the basket and loosened the strings that held her cloak closed. They had gotten tighter, or so it seemed. Or maybe Scarlet was just having issues breathing. She wasn't sure. The woods were dark and dead silent. Even, it seemed, the night creatures didn't dare come out on this night. That was, in its own way, creepy. Scarlet shuddered. She never really liked the woods in the daytime either. Suddenly, as she was walking with barely any moonlight to guide her, she heard rustling behind her. She froze for a moment before continuing. The rustling of leaves and the crack of sticks breaking beneath feet followed behind her. Every so often she heard a growl or some sniffing. Nothing more, but nothing less either. And she knew what was following her. This was the day that she had been waiting for. She stopped. She could see, up at the top of the hill, where the girl was standing at the bottom. Her grandmother's sweet shop, its lights warm and inviting in the dark. She could see the outline of her grandmother standing in the open doorway, waiting for her granddaughter. Scarlet realized that the growling and sniffing had stopped. Slowly, she turned around and saw what had been following her. Wolves. Wolves as big as horses, with pitch-black eyes and razor-sharp teeth. More than a dozen of them. Some had black fur, some had brown. All were silent. But not, Scarlet realized, looking at her. They were looking behind them. Suddenly, the wolves parted. One giant gray wolf with glowing red eyes walked through, silent as the night itself. It padded up until it was barely 3 feet away from the girl. Then it changed. The wolf changed into a 7-foot-tall man, covered in gray fur with a tail, wolf ears, claws, and those same glowing red eyes. The creature stared at her for the longest time, before speaking in a deep, gravelly voice.
What do you choose?
Scarlet blinked, then slowly grinned. But she did as she had been taught. What are my choices? The wolves shifted suddenly, as if they knew what was about to happen. The gray creature looked at them, then back at Scarlet.
You can either run or stay.
Scarlet's mind raced. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. This was the moment all Red girls have been waiting for. And so she chose. She looked at the gray wolf. and looked him straight in the eyes. "I choose to stay." The gray wolf suddenly grinned, showing his pointed teeth. Then he chuckled.
Good choice, young red. Now, where would you like to go?
Scarlet didn't even hesitate. "To my home, if you please." The gray wolf nodded and changed back into wolf form, laying flat on his belly so Scarlet could climb on his back. She heard his voice only once more, and this time it was only an echo in her mind.
Hang on tight, young red.
Scarlet did. In mere moments, they were at the edge of the woods, right by her house. She slid off the wolf and tightened her cloak before lowering the hood, her blonde hair glowing in the moonlight. She opened the door to see her mother in the kitchen, yet again baking. At that moment, she was opening a jar of what seemed to be strawberry jelly, or something of that sort. Her mother looked up astonished as Scarlet walked into their small home.
Scarlet, what are you doing?
Scarlet smiled sweetly at her mother. "I'm just coming home, Mother. Isn't that okay?" Her mother turned white as a sheet.
Scarlet, the wolves.
Scarlet walked closer, and her mother backed away, bumping into the counter, making the jar crash to the floor. Dark red liquid splattered the floor, wall, counter, and the two people. Scarlet never stopped smiling as she slipped a knife off the counter. Ironically, it happened to be the largest knife they had. "Mother, the wolves are fine. Aren't you glad your sweet little Red Riding Hood is home safe?" Her mother backed away yet again, only to run into the wall. She stared at her daughter.
You're my little girl. You're my little girl,
she said frantically. Scarlet stood directly in front of her. "Oh, but Mother, I am. I always have been. I just see things the way they actually are. I chose my path, and you chose yours. I personally don't like the family business." And with that, she stabbed her mother over and over. Blood sprayed, some getting Scarlet's face. But Scarlet only smiled before removing the key from the chain around her mother's neck and going to the large door she had only been behind once. She unlocked it and went inside. Behind the door were rows and rows and rows of shelves, filled with jars of deep red liquid. On each jar was a label. On each label a name and a date. Emma, December 15th, 2012. Adam, March 7th, 2002. James, August 25th, 2015. Scarlet looked at the jars in disgust before turning around and leaving, locking all 13 deadbolts on the door. Then she left the house, walking past her mother's body and the broken jar. Scarlet slipped the knife into a loop on the inside of her cloak once she was outside.
Now where to, young red?
The voice echoed in her head once more. Scarlet smiled, showing her teeth, which were turning razor sharp, even as she spoke. It's time to end the family business once and for all. And to think, people never realized just what was being into those sweets. One lone townsperson dared to peek out their door that night, and what they saw, they never spoke of again. What they saw was a young girl in a blood-red cloak, the hood up, skipping away from the lone house at the edge of the town, towards the sound of the howling of the wolf pack, led by none other than the creature known as the Big Bad Wolf.